Hello, everyone, and welcome to another art stream with myself, Maraud. And we've got several special guests, the usual Alexander Adams and Pat. Hello, guys.
Hiya.
Hello, everybody.
And we've got Al Shahtori as well, who jumped on last time. And today we're going to be continuing our analysis of art and politics and how they kind of mingle together, how they're tied together, and it's sort of been like a mini history of art, but just from the political lens, which has been quite fun. I think we got roughly to beyond the Renaissance, and to kind of kick off tonight, I thought we could start by looking at two quite interesting periods of time. Firstly, the English Civil War, and then the Glorious Revolution, and then we've got some great examples that Alexander's going to take us through from the French Revolution and beyond. But I just kind of, I guess, kick-starting with the English Civil War. Lots of interesting stuff happening there, and I guess from my perspective, we first got to talk about how the artist is employed to kind of project a certain, I guess, image or propaganda image of the king. And one of my favourite paintings from this time is from Van Dyck, and this is his Charles I in three positions. And does anyone know why? Have you guys seen this before at all?
Yes, this is quite a famous one, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Was the three positions, if I remember, wasn't it to do with the fact that a notable continental painter couldn't make it to the English court to paint his portrait? So he had this painted as a sort of reference. Would that be right?
Yeah, I heard it was like reference related and then kind of, expanded upon. But I think it's quite interesting because it shows his different sides. See his, his like the medallion of a specific order. Is that the is it? No, is that later? Panama, I'm relying on you to know all kingly orders.
I'm afraid this one's a bit beyond me. I'm gonna be able to tell you.
It's I think I know, but I can't. No, I
yeah, no.
Yeah, I think it might be a Stuart emblem. I'm not entirely sure.
Kind of going on from that, we've got kind of quite a few of these portrait paintings at a similar time where you've got the king or the ruler on a horse, again signifying his stature, but also holding emblems, and again the symbology of the items that are in a painting are super important. So again, you can see here Charles with the kind of rod of command. If you see a lot of Renaissance paintings actually with the is it the condottieri, the series, often their leaders would have this kind of rod that they would out and almost kind of conduct the battlefield from. In an instant, that he's the commander of the commander. Stuff that's kind of interesting with the armor as well, because it kind of implies that he's going into battle, but obviously. Like Charles never actually went into battle. He was always getting his Prince Rupert or whatever to command his forces for him. But again, it's to the masses, to the plebs or whatever, it's going to show off his his kingship and soldierly ability. And then this is another Van Dyck, and you kind of got this page boy. I guess he's a significant figure, but kind of looking up. With awe and respect at his king at the same time. But obviously, with the Civil War, there's a huge amount of strife, and Panama, you've kind of selected this painting across here. I hadn't actually seen it before, so I don't know if you want to talk through talk through it in a little bit more detail?
Yes. I mean, this is not the full picture. This is sort of a detail from it, the most clear one I could find. And it's interesting because it shows it's slightly more kind of interpersonal than most paintings of someone like King Charles I. You know, you would only expect to see normally commissions of Charles painted in his own in his own lifetime that are designed to be flattering, whereas this is from let's check my notes. This is from quite a bit later. This is, you know, long after his death. I think this was the 1800s this was painted. And it's just interesting to see these parliamentary soldiers set to guard him not long before his execution, sort of just making mockery of him. And you can actually see there that chap is actually blowing pipe smoke into his face. So it's a very sort of it's just so rare to see something like this. And of course, the other thing to note is that the king is completely unflappable. It seems he's not. I
think it reminds me a lot of those pictures of Christ taunted.
Yes, that's.
So I mean, I think that's a direct analogy that the painter's drawing.
Yeah, it's interesting again because obviously it's like you said, it's done later, and I wonder whether it is like a Catholic family, trying to. It is a propaganda piece in some ways, where again it's but also highlighting it's historical as well. So I think you get these interesting works of art which are both, you know, trying to tell a story and say, hey, no one's mentioned how torturous it must have been in those last few days for Charles, taunted and dragged through the muck, so to speak. But then at the same time, it's obviously portraying, you know, Parliament and the parliamentarians as these kind of drunkards and harassers. It's very, very interesting, I think. And you said you don't often get these kind of like I guess non-beautiful paintings. You know, it's not perfect. What was the date for the painting?
This was painted in 1836. It was commissioned by the Earl of Ellesmere.
So I think sorry.
It took some quite severe damage in the Second World War, and at the same time, it was actually thought lost when there was a flood at the Tate in 1928, and but it was found rolled up in an attic in 1973 or so.
It's great.
Apparently, yeah. It's you can actually see here. It's got some sort of a lot of marking and wear to it.
Yeah. What's interesting about the 19th century is they do a lot of kind of history paintings and historical narrative. But you don't get these kind of like little vignettes or scene. If it was a scene, the scene I'm thinking of is more like the Charles II in the tree. You know, that's quite a historical moment which gets picked up in the art world time and time again from the period. Okay, that was wrong. What the other painting you had was, and when did you see last see your father? Wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
What is that Cromwellian as well, is it?
When did you last see your father? Sorry, one moment. I accidentally closed the page. Yeah, so that's the children of a presumed royalist who are being interrogated by some sort of parliamentary commission. And we know that the gentleman doing the interrogation are parliamentary because the gentleman in the chair is wearing an orange sash, which is a bit of a tell. Something interesting about this is that the young boy there in the middle of the picture being interrogated seems quite unflappable in the face of all this. And of course, his clothing appears to be based on the very famous Boy in Blue, which I believe Alexander has put on the list. And he sort of stands out among all the sort of dark blues and greys and browns of the parliamentary figures. Again,
he's the only cool colour, isn't he? The only cool
yes.
hue.
I mean, it's kind of interesting to see a lot of these paintings done long after the Civil War that are kind of. I'm reminded slightly of the whole thing about the Spanish Civil War, that the nationalists won the war, but the Republicans won the art. And I think in this sense, the Royalists very much lost the war, but won the art of the English Civil War, in that the sort of pro-Royalist messages endure through art, even though they lost the war. See what I mean?
I think this is also held up as an example of like a narrative 19th century painting. And this is supposed to, it's not only supposed to be it's not only sympathetic to the Royalist cause, but it's also admiring of the stoicism and the filial piety of the son, who is resisting the interrogation of the parliamentarian. And he's, I think the story is that he's refusing to tell when he last saw his Royalist father. So it's a symbol of his resistance to oppression.
And sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, many of the Royalists would have seen this courtroom as effectively like a kangaroo court, because, of course, the court, the legal system, the framework of the legal system, like it is today, is that on the crown. And so, I guess, yeah, for him, standing there, the defiance is that even the boy is not recognizing the legitimacy of the courtroom.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, speaking of that, that good point, Tamar, around the parliamentarians losing the propaganda war. I think what's striking about Cromwell's reign is the lack of art, or maybe say surprising with his Puritan leanings, but certainly in terms of like publications and portraits, there are very few. I guess it's only a relatively short reign of 6 years or so, but of course this is one of the more famous ones. But again, you can see him with his, again, rod of authority, his suit of armor, but you've got, instead of the kind of base, you've got the plain Puritan collar coming through. But I think interesting how the parliamentarians have such a lack of art or anything interesting going on from an artistic perspective, and I think suffer in posterity because of that. Now, someone who doesn't suffer, I think, is Charles II, and I think what's interesting is during this time period, so is it 1661 or ish, with the Restoration, is the use of art as kind of mass propaganda, and obviously the printing press. I don't know if you mentioned it last time, or like etchings becoming super important, like Dürer, etc. But what you have at this period is these kind of mass works of art going out. So I think this is kind of interesting. This is something I found as part of the royal collections, which is the cavalcade of His Majesty's passing through the City of London towards his coronation. And again, it's a really simple, again, the etching isn't the best ever. The people are a bit clumsy. I mean, that guy looks ridiculously large compared to his horse, but maybe that's just maybe horses were much smaller back then. But again, things like proportion, etc., are just off. But what this is about, showing the imperial might, showing the people who are there again, Sorry for it's got a very temperamental zoom. Say squires, the king of knights, stewards of the chamber. It's showing the kind of full, court is back. These people, look at all these guys who are behind the new king, and this is going to going out to hundreds of people in the city of London, which previously was a parliamentary hotbed. So it's interesting to see the kind of growth of being used as this mass media to inform people, to tell them what people are about, but also to kind of again show show them what to think, basically. I've got Charles I paintings as well. I mean, again, this is a historical narrative where it's him kind of singing out from, I think it's in Germany, but I'll skip over it and go for this. I don't know how I feel about this painting, because it's ridiculous and over the top, but and almost camp, but it's quite funny at the same time, and it's obviously well rendered. This is the quite famous Charles II in his Sea Triumph. So you can see Charles II. He's almost a god here. He's got the kind of angel holding up his crown, almost like a Caesar. He's riding a scallop with the Nereids and the classical sea. So again, it's evoking a few things here. It's evoking the kind of the power of gods. All of the classicism is being pulled through in the kind of Renaissance period is, showing that he's almost like a Roman emperor, and it's all about majesty. But also you've got these kind of things, little hidden details in the background, like these kind of ships showing his, he's a man of military might, and he means business. He's the king of the seas. So I thought it was quite a nice propaganda piece. But I
think it's really hot on the idea of presenting Britain as ruler of the waves, and so obviously he is taking his role as ruler of Britain as also the ruler of the waves, and a demonstration of naval might as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Is now this is not. I'm. So is James II after Charles II?
Yes, he succeeds Charles II and then is overthrown in the revolution.
Okay, excellent. I got things right then. So Panama, this is one of your selections, I believe.
Not this particular one. I don't think, unless I'm. No, mine was him in Roman garb. Although it was painted by Lely. It should appear here unless I made a mistake.
No.
Oh, there it is. On the right. It's on the second row down on the right.
This one?
No. Well, I'm not sure where it's gone now.
Oh, yes. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, that's the one. I mean, again, as you pointed out, it's kind of ridiculous. Like these 1600s leaders, in their sort of Roman garb in paintings. I mean, it's, but at the same time, there's something important in a cultural sense here, because I think this is to do in particular with the Anglo-Dutch War. If I may be wrong, but I think that's what this is. If I just make sure.
There's like a couple there at this time period, say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right with the Roman garb. It's tying into the fashions of the times around neoclassicism, but also it's tying into again connections with the past and power. But also, I always find these kind of Baroque examples of Romanism to be like very un-Roman. There's all it. I don't know that like when you see like classical, like ancient Roman sculpture, there is just pure masculinity, and often because maybe it's just these sumptuous fabrics or put like ribbons and details. That's what's kind of softens the image of it. Or again the jewels, and again a Roman wouldn't be caught dead in a luxury book, like this, it would be the women's book. So again, it's interesting how it's kind of pulled on the past again and sort of adapted a time period.
Yeah, it's like it's like the 17th, how a person in the 17th century would see, how they would sort of see Roman society, and they sort of apply the culture, clothing upon Roman society as they would have seen it from their perspective. I mean, in some ways, it's a bit like with the I can't really see the photo too well on my screen. Is he wearing some sort of trousers or
He doesn't appear to be.
Yes,
okay.
I think he is wearing basically, but again, that's a mix-up because that's like a German thing, is Germanic leggings. But anyway,
Yeah, I was going to say it's quite medieval. So I was just saying it's some of it just seemed a bit medieval. Like obviously, but the shoes though that's it's a bit Roman. But then of course you got the armor in the background there. Sort of Germanic armor.
I guess it's making a statement. He doesn't even need to wear armor. He's here in his kind of triumph gear. I guess it's a victory painting. I don't know if Panamara, if you had much luck finding about the wars yet.
I'm not sure about the wars, but this is certainly a victory painting. Just because armor is something you wear to go to war, and the fact that he's taken it off is a symbol that it's over and he's won essentially. Whichever conflict this is meant to portray.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to the Glorious Revolution, and again, what's interesting about these moments. So this is a supply of James II with William of Orange and Mary, but again, a vast amount of art that's being used as propaganda. So again, you'd have things like the William of Orange's arrival in England as an etching. But I found a few other interesting little bits and bobs here, a bit of kind of material culture. So these are a series of playing cards showing the story of William and Mary, which would have been given around. But I thought, again, that's kind of quite charming. But also, this is a very kind of low form of art that, again, a commoner would have used in playing cards in a pub, and that's how they would have interpreted the story, is through these small little bits of art, again, poorly rendered, but they're there to have a specific purpose. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but during the coronation, obviously William of Orange, as the head for the Dutch, was big into Delftware, so it's the kind of blue and white ceramic ware that's very popular at this time. But there's an entire kind of genre of painting around cornware for William and Mary in the Delft style. But what's hilarious about it is that it's all done by English people, so the quality of painting is absolutely terrible. But there's a real vernacular charm to I find to the whole ware. So you can see his William and Mary. That's quite a good one. You often have here you go. This is what I'm talking about.
Could have been done in MS Paint.
Exactly. I don't know. Maybe maybe someone's messed around with that one actually. Yeah, but there's just a ridiculous amount of it, and again, this is kind of like another low form of art being distributed to the masses to kind of say, look, this is your new ruler. It also with the Delft angle, it's kind of saying, oh, that's the Dutch. And also, there's an important thing around that they're co-monarchs as well. So again, England couldn't have taken William taking over entirely. He has to be a co-monarch with Mary, and you see them equally depicted. It's I also kind of pulled out a coin for that as well. You got William on the front, of course, and then Mary. But this is almost Roman, where you have those kind of moments where there's kind of two dual emperors, and again you can see their equal stature because they're equal height. But although William has got precedence because he's kind of placed further in the foreground. But again, it's interesting to kind of, even something as simple as the artwork on a coin can show the status of an individual at the time. Okay, I think that'll probably take us to, we've got, is the second? That's 19th century, isn't it?
Yes, that would be the 1860s, I think.
Okay, we'll hold that for now, and we'll skip you Alexander's, and this is his race first selection. Although I have to say that released a most excellent video on sensuality recently, which is working out. So this is probably right up your street.
Yeah, so this is a typical example of the court painting in France around 1752. So this is typical of the Rococo. I mean, obviously the most famous one is Fragonard's The Swing, but this is just sort of typical of the sort of art that was produced for this period. And of course, this was very much just for the court only. I think this is the Mistress of the King. So this is obviously sort of private stuff. It wouldn't be on display anywhere at all, except inside a royal palace, a royal residence. So anyway, I think this is kind of like typical of the indulgent and sort of sensual nature of Rococo art, which developed from Baroque art.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that there's a lot of again, certainly in England, this loosening of values again. They've again in Charles II's court, they use art to the moral standing of the court, or not necessarily morals, but kind of like what's socially acceptable. So you go from women previously in the parliamentary reign having these kind of tight clothes and unrestricted, and in all the kind of late Stuart things, the clothes are just falling off the women, etc. So again, something like a painting can show the values and the kind of direction of a certain king as well. But it's interesting to see again someone that would be considered quite low status, like a mistress, held up in such regard. But the French had specific roles for their mistresses in court. Is that right? Am I at this time period? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like an official, like the king's mistress is like an actual courtly role.
I believe they still do now.
Do you know much about the text across there? Is it kind of showing that she's not just a beautiful woman, but also well read?
Well, okay. So I'm looking here at Wikipedia, and it says that she was born in France, or even though she had Irish ancestry, and it goes on to talk about as the mistress of Louis XV, and she died in 1814, aged 77. So, I mean, it was just basically to include it as an example of the sort of the decadent phase of Rococo, which is obviously something that will be countered in the coming French Revolution, which happens in the the 1780s and 90s.
Yeah.
And I guess as part of the revolution, there is a eve of exciting French artist and talent, and this is one of the first paintings you pulled together. I love this piece, but do you want to kick us off on it?
Well, this is the Oath of the Herat, painted by Jacques-Louis David. I think it's 1784, I think. 1784. So this was a group of relatives who were swearing fealty and pledging their allegiance to potentially die in battle. And obviously you see the female relatives on the right weeping, but the men are stoical in their adherence to duty and brotherhood and martial valor. And so they are prepared to sacrifice themselves for a cause greater than them. And this was part of the neoclassical movement, which became adopted by the French Revolution when it occurred in 1789.
So yes, and again, I guess this is the kind of revolutionary movement's already started, and something like this it's a message. It's a bit of a dog whistle to other radicals who are out there that you need to come together as brothers and to make your oath. But it's interesting in terms of composition with some of the kind of straight lines of the kind of spears and the swords and the columns, but also I know that there's that kind of powerful nature, but it's sort of melancholy at the same time with all of the women crying. I love that the little boy looking on to that. Sorry.
Yes. So it's what you've got here is you've got a lot of clarity, you've got a lot of stability. So this is the opposite of the Rococo, which was to do with sort of flowing, bubbling, natural forms. Here we have something more rigid, more geometrical, obviously harking back to Rome, the paintings of Poussin in the 17th century. And this is sort of like, this is a return, this is like a back to basics movement, the neoclassical movement.
Okay, that's great. And then the death of the Marat.
Just one sort of addendum about that painting. I believe it's actually part of the origin myth around the Roman salute, and what would come to be known in modern terms as the fascists' salute. Now, I don't believe there's any historical evidence that the Romans used this as a salute, but I think because there's a statue of Caesar in a similar pose, this painting basically was one of the founding kind of. I think it basically sealed the image of the Romans doing this as a salute to superiors or to commanding officers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and obviously we should explain that the fascisti are the bindings around the reeds. So the reeds are the individual citizens in a society, and the fascisti is the cords that bind them together, that make them strong. So this is the origin of fascism, which is the idea of an ideology which unites the people to make them strong when individually they would be weak. And so obviously this sort of the martial valor, swearing an oath, and the band of brothers and the idea of the fascisti obviously sort of combine in a number of revolutionary movements throughout the centuries.
Yes, it's interesting how you could compare and contrast this to some of those the James painting where he's pulling a different angle on the Romans, but they're still all pulling to the Romans. This is a revolutionary movement where it's about the people, and they're saying, oh no, it's the brotherhood angle, while the James paint kingship and emperorship as well. But onto Marat.
Yeah, so Marat was a famous revolutionary. He was a journalist, and one of the most influential of the revolutionaries, of the deputies. And he was, the famous story, of course, he was in the bath because he had contracted some severe skin ailments, and he received a note from someone called Charlotte Corday, who was coming to him, and she had written a note and said she was ready to expose traitors within the revolutionary movement. And of course, if you're in a revolutionary movement, you're always on the lookout for traitors. So he agreed to meet her, and when she came in, she stabbed him to death, and this is him dying in the bath, where he had to spend hours every day to try and alleviate his ailments. So this is the idea of the revolutionary in the pose of the martyred Christ. So here we have the martyred revolutionary, someone who died for the revolution. He died specifically at the hands of a political enemy in the course of doing his duty as a revolutionary. So this is obviously drawing the analogy between Christ and Marat. And we should remember that the French Revolution was specifically anti-clerical, although curiously enough, there were some early stages when, during the early revolutionary victories, people would go to church to say mass, to thank the saints for intervening on the side of the revolution. This didn't last very long because the revolution decided it was definitely anti-clerical. And so David, the painter of this is also by Jacques-Louis David, became a deputy, and he was entrusted with designing a festival to celebrate the Supreme Being, which was an invented god of the revolutionary, designed specifically to replace the Judeo-Christian god, and the Supreme Being would be the replacement figure in the religion of the revolution.
Do we have a painting? Are there paintings of the gathering? It was outside Paris, wasn't it? The tree and everything, and it was where
there are some prints. I think if you look, there will be some prints.
Yeah, because I know that's where Robespierre was laughed at basically by the masses when he announced it, because it was.
What's it called?
It was when.
If you look up sort of French Revolution Supreme,
it was like the Supreme Being Festival or something like that. Yeah. I think, yeah, or the Festival of the Supreme Being.
There you go. Look at this.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It was a minute. They built a little miniature mountain that they would process up.
It's interesting how kind of like using art again to try and almost create this new religion, but obviously it massively failed. So maybe it does show the limitations of the power of arts there. That literally can't sustain it alone. Okay, that's kind of cool. Just on the Marat painting, again, I think David for me is one of my favorite paintings of this time, just because again he just get the the pathos, the emotion. That I like the kind of like light coming through from the side. It's almost kind of ghostly or spiritual, like the box almost be like a tombstone. You could just really images. But again, that is definitely tapping into like letter or those kind of Christian iconography. But moving away from.
Sorry, as just one last point. You can actually find a cast of his death mask, so you can actually check how accurate David was. He worked from the body of Maraud, and he also used a cast as well too. But yeah. So here we have the sort of post-revolutionary period. So this is Bonaparte crossing the Alps in, I think it's 1800. This is painting again by David. So David goes from a revolutionary to being an acolyte of Napoleon.
A monarchist.
So here yes, yeah, effectively, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, this is the soon-to-be emperor as a heroic military leader, which I mean, he genuinely was a heroic military leader, and of course here he's given the equestrian portrait, which we've seen from before, which is given to kings, and I think this is a particularly good example of a heroic equestrian portrait.
I actually have in front of me, when this came up, I went and got it rolled up, a full-sized reproduction of this. And one thing that's always interested me about this is I don't hang pictures of Napoleon in my house, by the way, which is why it's rolled up. You have his name there etched onto the rock, along with slightly obscured the names of Hannibal and King Carol of Sweden, which is, really what seals the sort of power deal here, is that he is sort of placing himself among the great rulers and marshals that have crossed the Alps to come and make their names.
I think that's a good point with the rocky nature of it. So again, you can see the mount. It's a physical object. It's a physical obstacle, but also metaphysical as well. And I feel like, his hand pointing, it's saying we're going to go over there, but also we're going to climb the mountain and achieve success and achieve. It's almost transcendence. I think he's almost pointing to heaven. Do you know what I'm saying? He's not really pointing at the mountain. So I think it's quite a clever painting, which has a lot of raw power. Again, just the face of the horse, a sort of love mad horse faces. It's pretty niche. Again, like in Stubbs does this perfectly, where he just captures that kind of like energy and power of a horse in the eye alone.
That is absolutely correct, and that is what a horse looks like if you sort of charge it up a hill, then rear up on it. That is the face it will pull. It's very, very accurate.
Okay, nice. So we've got Napoleon as Mars the Peacemaker. Do you want to?
Yeah. Okay. So the reason I chose this one was because you'll have heard quite possibly about the Maggie Hambling statue, which was unveiled recently in London. It includes a female figure, which is nude, and the painting is the sculpture is entitled "For Mary Wollstonecraft." Now, it's not a picture; it's not a depiction of Mary Wollstonecraft, so that's important. But you get these sort of midwits writing articles saying, I bet you there are no statues of men with all nude and whatever." And it's like, well, so yeah, so this is it. Now, regardless of what you think of it as a sculpture, it's not actually a depiction of Mary Wollstonecraft. So I wrote a small piece in defense of the artistic liberty of Maggie Hambling, whilst not actually defending the piece itself.
All I'm saying is that chin, basically. That is the weakest chin ever.
If you're going to criticize it, at least criticize it with something substantial, like the chin.
Yeah. Anyway, this sculpture generated a lot of articles, and you had lots of female writers saying, I bet you there are no statues of men with their penis out. No, so no statues of famous men with their penis out. Well, here you are. This one, the penis here is covered for your delicate sensibilities, but this is Antoine Canova's depiction of Napoleon as Mars the Peacemaker, sculpted in from 1802 to 1806, and this is in Apsley House. So can you guess how it got to Apsley House?
We nicked it.
Yes, but yeah, basically it's war booty. The Duke of Wellington carried it off. And put it in his London home. His London home is actually officially called Number 1 London. It's the number 1 house in London officially. So so in Apsley House you can see an Italian sculpture by an Italian neoclassical artist depicting Napoleon Bonaparte completely nude. So for anyone who thinks that there are double standards for men and women, well, there are sometimes, but in this case, not at all. So here we have Napoleon as another heroic figure. Here it's a figure from Roman antiquity, Roman mythology. So Mars, the peace bringer. So he's literally doing that thing of unifying a continent by conquering it and therefore bringing peace, which is obviously was one way of bringing peace.
Yeah, it's obviously that paradox or whatever. What's interesting for me is a couple of things. So can you see these connection lines across here and this? Now, when the Roman sculptors were trying to copy Greek sculptors, they were never, they didn't have as access to as quality marble, and they weren't as good sculptors. So they would add in these little little connectors to make their work actually like hold together. And there's been an active decision by Canova to keep those in there to all make it like an ancient Roman statue. Because I'm pretty sure Canova could, certainly that back leg, he could have done without the connection. He's just kind of trying to show the antiquity of it. I've heard another reason for the inclusion of connector pins or bars or struts, and that is that some of the Roman copyists, actually many of the Roman copyists were actually Greek, working in Greek workshops, and then they were shipping their works to Italy. But the Greek or Roman copyists who were working in stone were actually working from Greek originals that were in bronze. Now, bronze is much stronger and more stable. It's less fragile than marble. So obviously you could do things with bronze that you couldn't do in stone without these supporting struts. So I think that's another reason why there are struts in so many Roman statues. Okay. I also like the idea that, you've got the gigantic statue, and I know it's like a meme that he's not actually that short, obviously, Napoleon being quite a small man, having this gigantic statue. Also, didn't Canova do a Lucifer as well? I feel maybe I'm just imagining it, but there's something Luciferian about the face of Napoleon there. I can't think. He may have done that.
No. Yeah, I mean, the Napoleon was like, outside of revolutionary France, he was the beast from Elba, the beast of Corsica. I mean, he was. So there's lots of writings about Napoleon, sort of comparing him to the devil.
Except in the early years, of course, you remember he was heroic because he was seen as expanding the French Revolution. So all the all the Enlightenment types and the progressive types, as it were, of that period, heroized him. So you had like the Beethoven writing the Eroica Symphony and dedicating it to Bonaparte, and then crossing it out when he felt that Napoleon went too far and became a tyrant. So the initial impressions of Napoleon, obviously outside of Britain, were actually relatively favourable, and it's only as he became more successful and more active as a military general outside of France that he became reviled.
Yeah, I think it was the Battle of Austerlitz that it definitely changed sort of the Germanic principalities and the Habsburgs, because obviously that was quite a humiliating defeat for those people.
Okay, on to the next painting, and this is a classic, Napoleon on his throne.
Yes, so this is when it comes up, it will be Ingras's portrait of Napoleon on the imperial throne, 1806. So this was quite a controversial one, not just simply because of obviously he was adopting royal heirs, imperial heirs, but also Ingres was particularly criticised because of the lighting of this. It was seen because it's a very pale and very cold light. Ingres was a great fan of Van Eyck. So obviously he was interested in painting things because we talked about the Roland painting last week with the donor, and the Roland painting, the Roland Madonna by Jan van Eyck, was an inspiration for Ingres. And so when Ingres painted this, he painted he painted Napoleon in a very pale light, and he was criticized as being Gothic. So this is something that Ingres was adopting, because he saw Napoleon as a remnant of a heroic, chivalric age from the Middle Ages. So this is why he adopted such a sort of frosty and cold approach to the painting. But obviously, this was something of a shock to people who were more used to sort of the paintings of David and even the style of Boucher and Fragonard, which were quite warm. This was actually sort of super realistic and very cold.
Yeah, what's interesting for me is actually now you mentioned it, the textiles is just like Van Eyck, where they've kind of got this super realist quality, but also, I don't know, there's something about them where it's a definite style. So yeah, I'd never noticed that before. And also you've got a different kind of symbolic language, something like the sword here. You know, that's because is it a replica of Charlemagne's sword, isn't it, or something like that? I seem to recall. But again, the sword is much more of a medieval idea, as opposed to kind of like, well, there's still Romanism in there, where you've got the kind of the laurel wreath on his. Can you tell us anything about the two staffs that he's holding?
Not offhand. I should imagine one of them might be a reference to the Holy Roman Emperor, but that because I think. Obviously, Napoleon at this time was he was hoovering up various art along with various titles. So obviously, what he did is he also installed his brother as emperor or king of Spain at this time, which is something we'll come to in a moment. But I can't think offhand. I'll have a look. Yeah.
Is it? I mean, is it? I was just wondering, because I was just having a look here. Is it? Could the staff be a reference to Zeus? Because I've
Zeus is mentioned in the Wikipedia here.
Yeah. Because I'm just looking at the Van Eyck.
Could be on the Zeus.
Sorry, I was just going to say the frontal portraits refers to the colossal statue of Zeus at the Olympia by Filders. So I was just wondering.
So in his right hand he holds the scepter of Charlemagne, and in his left the hand of justice. On his head is a golden laurel wreath similar to one worn by Caesar. He also wears an ermine hood with the great collar of the Légion d'honneur, a gold embroidered satin tunic, and an ermine-lined purple velvet cloak decorated with gold bees. Obviously, the purple is a reference to royalty. The coronation sword is in its scabbard and held by a silk scarf. The subject wears white shoes embroidered with gold and resting on a cushion.
Just the mention of the bees. We need to talk about that Napoleon apparently loved bees, and the bees was one of his symbolic motifs that he used time and time again, representing all those kind of like hundreds of workers that would work together to achieve something. So I thought it was quite an interesting and novel choice for I don't know if your spirit animal is the bee, but there you go.
Also, I was just going to say with the two staffs as well. It makes sense that he has the one of the staff representing justice, because one of his biggest political achievements before he became emperor was the Napoleonic Code, which is still it's still enshrined, I believe, in the current French Republic as well. So that was quite a big, because it sort of enshrined the rights and the I guess you could say the positive reforms that the revolution that people wanted to have from the revolution.
Okay, let's move on a little bit further. I think this is the next one.
Yeah. So here we have a painting by Antoine Vertes. So Belgian Romantic painter. This is a posthumous painting of, it's called A Scene in Hell, and I think it's probably from around the 1850s. So this is Napoleon in hell being assailed by the sort of the shades of angry, the angry populace who he has betrayed. So Vertes was something of a reformer. He was quite interested in social matters. So obviously this is like Beethoven, where you have a lot of progressives who felt quite wedded to the idea of Napoleon as a natural extension and sort of moderation of the revolution, and yet of course it tipped into sort of imperial despotism. Now obviously Vertes is sort of well after the revolution, so this is the 1850s. But this was a symbol of his execration of this potentially reforming figure who became a tyrant.
Yeah, what I quite like about it is there's almost something like Rubenesque about it, with like just the mass of people sort of merging into one. Just the facial expressions are kind of like these moments of madness, and there's just so much like little mini details in here, like this small little boy, I don't know, maybe calling out to a father who's had his head twisted in a weird way. Do you know what I'm saying? There's these little snippets which are really nice. So
he was a great admirer of Rubens.
Well, there you go. Okay, cool. I mean, do you want to talk about Romanticism a little bit, like as opposed to neoclassicism?
Yeah, so obviously neoclassicism was the dominant art from the sort of 1780s through to the sort of 1810s. And then at the end of the 1810s, around around 1810 or so, you have the rise of Romanticism. So obviously this is an art movement which is more to do with it's kind of like it's an anti-Enlightenment movement. So it's a movement against. Although obviously it's not a pro-religious movement, it's an anti-rationalist movement. So it's to do with harking back to heroic myths, to the power of poetry, to an emotional rather than a rational scientific response to nature. And Romanticism is very connected with it's an extension of the ideas of the rights of man and so forth. So it does relate to the Enlightenment and to revolutionaries and the Jacobins and so forth.
It's almost like post-Enlightenment in that way. I mean, on the religious side of things, there is sort of religious elements to it. Certainly in like the writing side, it's like you said, the naturalism and nature as God. But there are Christians and that kind of language is brought into a lot of their work. But sorry, yeah, you were saying.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's a lot of spirituality, and there's a sort of paganistic worship of nature and so forth. So here is another one of Vertes's paintings called the Premature Burial. Now, of course, if you remember your Edgar Allan Poe, who's writing stories in the 1830s and 1840s. This is 1854 for this painting. This is a scene of someone, you can't see it on here, but actually stamped, I think it's stamped on this cheap pine coffin, is actually something that says mort du cholera, so dead of cholera, and certified. And so this was an example of something that was actually quite common, that during outbreaks of cholera, people would fall into these comas which resembled death. And so it was not uncommon for people in comas to be considered dead and buried while still alive. And there were these horror stories, real horror stories, of people coming back to life while in the grave, while in a crypt or in a coffin and so forth. And so even at this time, you had stories. I'm not sure if Poe writes about it, but he writes a lot about premature burials. And you actually had people constructing crypts or graves which had a rope inside the coffin, which someone could pull if they awoke inside a coffin buried, and this would ring a bell above ground.
Yes,
And so this was Viet protesting against the slapdash nature of the way that the poor were treated by doctors.
Yes, and this was much more common. Well, I mean, this happened at a horrifying scale, mass burying of people alive when they were in comas because of cholera. And there's constant exhumations from this period show coffins with scratches on the inside, which is a very, very, very horrific thing to confront.
So you've got that little fantastic toad squatting on the skull as well.
Yeah,
it's almost kind of like a memento mori, but like inverted or something like that. It's kind of like death conquered, but by this small little living creature. But what I think is interesting as a work of art, it's almost like political commentary at the time. There's for me, again, maybe it's just my horrific sense of humor. There's a dark humor element to it, and again, I think maybe the choice is it meant to be a nun as well. I think it's taking the mick a little bit off.
Well, I'm not sure. I think it's someone in a funeral shroud. I'm
okay.
not sure that it's supposed to be religious. I mean, obviously they've got the cross painted very roughly, but it's showing sort of what a cheap and sort of not a fastidious way that the poor were treated.
I mean, this has unfortunate echoes of our current year. If I remember back in just before the summer, when people in the UK being buried in cardboard coffins or something, or papery coffins.
Yeah, they were being stacked. The bodies were in the morgue. Some morgues were just stacking them, like what we got here. Because you got around his feet. They've just dumped another coffin on top, which just sort of means it's, it's like the industrial scale sort of bodies piling up.
Yes, indeed.
Haunting. So this, speaking of haunting, I mean, you've chosen some pretty dark paintings here, Alex.
Yes, it's all sex and horror, really, isn't it? So here we have a painting called what's this again? So this is Hunger, Insanity, and Crime from Wiertz again from the 1850s. So remember, Wiertz is a sort of social progressive. He's concerned about social issues. And so here he's got a painting of a woman, a mother who's been driven mad through hunger, and you can see what she's cooking. Yeah, so she's cooking her own children for food. And there's another painting which I couldn't find, which is called For the Want of a Creche, which is basically I think it's based on a true newspaper story of a woman who's a single mother, presumably a widow, or her husband was in the army or something. And she went out to work, and she left the child too close to the fire, and the child and the crib caught fire, and the child was killed. And this was Wiertz's protest against women having to work, and also maybe the fact that they didn't have an opportunity they didn't have any relatives, or they didn't have an opportunity to find a carer for their child when they went off to work. So this is an alternate version, which is here, where the mother is driven to madness and cannibalism.
Just one other comment on the subject matter. So obviously, again, it's a dark matter, but it's interesting because everything we've looked at previously before the French Revolution is very much focused on these kind of elites and power and its propaganda. But this is about social commentary about change. Which again follows through some of those enlightenment values, but again, a lot more kind of maybe not since like Bruegel or something the kind of vernacular nature of life or whatever. These are kind of meant to be vignettes from real people's lives. This does sort of remind me, actually, someone I think we should have probably done as well. Some of Hogarth's paintings.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, the Hogarth, like the Rake's Progress, or the etchings of the engravings of Beer Street and Gin Alley. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is obviously like 100 years before, but Hogarth does these almost political. This is called Gin Lane, and it just packs through from. This is a woman who is just so drunk that her child flies from her breast. You've got a man who's so drunk that he literally is emaciated because he's there's this kind of sense of madness and chaos, and again, it's social commentary, but also this is an etching, so it would have gone out to loads of people as well. So it's of a similar idea.
There are echoes of the kind of modern charity adverts, aren't there, that sort of focus in on a single starving child in the Yemen or Somalia or wherever. I mean, it's essentially that. It's kind of mass produced propaganda that is designed to highlight a particular social point, essentially. This is slightly more romanticized, obviously, but it's the same effect.
I was going to say, this is all sound that we're going down a very progressive path right now. Is art, do we need to ban art for because it's the creator of progressive?
Obviously we're going to get onto sort of social realism later on, but so the idea that you've got satire here, you've got social commentary in the Vertes painting. You've also got horror. You've got Gothic horror, which is obviously closely aligned to Romanticism. There are different strands blending.
Yeah, that's true. I guess one of the kind of differential hallmarks is that kind of pulling in from traditions, and again, I feel like I think we're doing a little bit of an injustice calling him like a sort of reminding us of those charity videos that it's satire and spoof, but I know what you're saying. Sorry.
Yeah, if I clarify, I didn't mean to paint Hogarth as a sort of progressive reformer. If anything, this is quite a sort of reactionary piece of propaganda. But I mean, yeah, I think that the effect that the art is meant to have on the viewer is the same, essentially. That you sort of go, oh God, look at these conditions. We need to do something now, Except obviously that Hogarth is telling us you need to sort of moral up, and the charity commercials are just telling us to shell out. That's the difference.
He's the Peter Hitchens of the engraving world.
Very much.
Okay, lovely. I think this.
This is Géricault. Géricault, of course, the very famous Romantic artist. We'll get to his most famous picture in a minute. But this is called The Return from Russia. This is a lithograph, I think, from 1818. Lithograph, of course, is a print form, so this is going to be widely distributed. It's very cheap, can go out to lots of people, or go out to people all across the country. So this is a scene of Napoleon's retreat from Moscow. And obviously it focuses on the suffering of the soldiers. Now, Géricault he was from sort of minor aristocracy, but he was also something of a, I'm not sure if you call him a Jacobin, but he was sort of on the liberal wing, as it were. So he was suggesting, that people should have sympathy and compassion for the veterans of Napoleon's army, without necessarily endorsing the sort of the Napoleonic foreign policy. And he did a series of pictures of veterans who had returned to France and who were being treated callously, who were begging, who were crippled, And so this is obviously a form of him reminding people about the debts that they owed the soldiers who had died and suffered in the Napoleonic Wars.
I think you kind of mentioned that it's, again, just trying to show the plight of the soldiers, because in some ways it's almost like a demoralizing, this is kind of like counter propaganda that you would send out to the French troops just to kind of show the horrific impact the Russian campaign had. It would have a really negative impact, but
although this is 1818, so this is after it, long after the event. So this is execution in London. This is a drawing by Géricault. Géricault came to England. He was actually the first French artist who was seriously interested in England. He was a great horse fanatic, and he was interested in hunting, and so obviously England was a great place for him. He came to draw the horses for a series of prints. He also witnessed some executions, public executions. He was opposed to the death penalty, and it's very interesting that he and Vertes, who we just moved off, but Vertes was also a big opponent of the death penalty. So this is interesting that he's kind of a reformist. He's a humanist, but he's also a romantic. And here we see him depicting a hanging at Tyburn, I think, in London. And obviously he's got a slightly negative take on it.
Yeah, there's almost like a ghostly nature. Again, obviously, it's I don't know if it's not finished. The pictures quality is not that great, but there's almost a ghostly nature. Is it the guy with this kind of?
Yeah, but I think he's got a hood on his head. I guess maybe the drawing around the face is kind of quite light, just to indicate that indicate his features, but they're covered.
Mm. No, I think it's really nice. You've almost got like a snapshot of three different people. Kind of, I know, lovers embrace across on one side, or the kind of stoicism on the left. But again, as a piece of reformation, like reforming propaganda, it's quite effective, I think. So, okay, I think this is the next one, the very famous raft.
Yeah, so this is the Raft of the Medusa, 1819. This was a great painting. Caused a sensation. This is based on a true story of a French frigate, which was off the coast of Africa, due to a series of unfortunate circumstances and also to inappropriate commands. The commanders were incompetent. The ship foundered, and there were too many people on small rafts. They were driven to disease, dehydration, and madness, and they were also attacked by sharks. So there were very few survivors, and so we see here moment of drama, the famous moment of drama, which is where one of the people on the raft is lifted up, and he holds a piece of cloth, and he's waving to a ship which is on the horizon. This is one. Some of them feel that they are going to be rescued, whereas the figure on the left, with the sort of red cloak, he's holding the body of his son, and he's despairing. He feels as though, well, even if he is rescued, his son is already dead. Interestingly enough, one of the models for this painting happened to be Delacroix, who's going to be an artist who we'll see in a moment. Yep, that's the ship. So obviously this is a moment of high drama. It's a moment of action. It's a fantastic way of depicting all these bodies, the anatomies and so forth. So it was a tour de force. It was also a hugely political painting in that it was implicitly criticizing the Bourbon Restoration, which had allowed such political appointments to the military and the naval service, which had allowed the incompetence of the officers to lead to the unnecessary deaths of so many people, so many French citizens. So that was why it became a cause célèbre.
And the painting itself is pretty huge, isn't it?
It's gigantic.
Like, yeah, I'm always impressed by the scale of it. Interestingly, just as an aside, I think I saw like a program about how it's kind of been modernized and, modernized, aka barbarized. Maybe I'll do a quick search for some modern versions of it. But it's pretty amazing. But again, it's kind of this is the kind of start of these kind of more historical narrative, moral messages coming through. But again, there's something definitely classical or Renaissance about it. This could be almost like Michelangelo with again, the father and son and the La Pieta, or like all the kind of the hands and the bodies stretched out like the Sistine Chapel. So again, it's a pretty masterful work. Just talk about it for a second, and I'm going to see if I can find some of these modern versions.
So what he did was he interviewed some of the survivors. He actually drew and painted some of the survivors as well. So he was trying to make it as accurate as possible. He built a small replica of the actual raft in his studio, so he could have the models pose on it, not all at once, obviously. He also did quite interesting. He also studied studied corpses. He studied the heads of beheaded criminals and also the severed limbs, which had been amputated from the diseased limbs, which had to be amputated in those days because there was no cure for gangrene and so forth. That's a hideous thing. Oh dear.
No, these are like, this is it.
I was just going to say, which was quite interesting.
Right,
I was just going to say, in the previous the real one, but even in this one, it sort of references it. But to the top right of the painting, you can see a storm, what appears to be a storm, and of course that's where the ship is sort of coming from. And I thought that was quite interesting because the storm there, it doesn't necessarily obviously mean the I was just thinking, doesn't really necessarily mean that was for them that's going to be their sort of saving hope, because that it's like a uncertainty, I guess, sort of over the men on the raft.
Yeah, because there was a doubt about whether or not the ship had seen them, and I think there was a case where they saw a ship and the ship didn't respond. So there was sort of like there was a moment of human drama.
But no, these one day was
I think there's one with the Simpsons as well. There's so many different parodies.
I think, I mean, parodies are good. It's just actually, yeah, see if there's a Simpsons one.
No. Anyway, I could spend hours looking at these, I think. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's carry on. But really interesting. And we're on to some Goyas now.
Yeah, so this is obviously famous Goya painting. This is the 3rd of May, 1804, was it? 1808. So this was a scene where you had Spanish rebels who were being shot by the Bonapartist troops. Bonaparte installed his brother as regent of Spain. And so here we see the French supporting soldiers executing the Spanish rebels. And obviously, it's very famous. It's been analysed a lot, and you have the central figure with the upraised arms is being obviously compared to Christ. So this is another example of the martyred revolutionary who had died in the cause of national pride or national self-determination. Interestingly enough, Goya was actually more on the side of the French monarch than on the side of the Spanish rebels. I've just reviewed the new Goya biography by Tomlinson. My review is going to be coming out any day soon. So here you can see these are the prisoners. They had revolted the day before against the French troops and the Spanish collaborators, the Spanish royalist collaborators against the Spanish people. They were captured. They were given a sort of, I'm not sure if they were even given a trial, and then the next day they were executed. This is all in Madrid in 1808, I think.
I mean, something further to note about this is that unlike a lot of other execution paintings, I mean, quite famously, you've got the execution of Marshal Ney, the execution of Emperor Maximilian. There's a real sense of just hopelessness and just anguish with this one. And I think part of the reason is that the historical event surrounding this was really sort of needless. I mean, you basically got Spain as an ally of the French, and Napoleon basically on a whim stages a military coup and installs his brother as king, as Alexander said. I mean, there's no real reason to do that. All it did was open a massive another front essentially for him to have to fight on, which may have actually eventually ruined his ambition. So I mean, you can see in the face of the man in the white shirt there, just the sense of just needlessness of this entire tragedy. And it was one of the most brutal wars of the 1800s. This conflict in Spain, because it was just, some of the worst war crimes in the entire of the Napoleonic Wars were committed just between Spanish and French occupiers who didn't really want to be there.
Just on that kind of sense of total despair, again, if you look at the kind of sky, it's just black. The town has just got this miasmic cloud over the front of it where you can barely see what's going on. Everything's just illuminated by this kind of box lamp. So again, it's just that real sense of darkness and sadness, really. So it's obviously pretty cool painting. I think they had another. Have I gone out of order now?
Yeah, you did it out of order. That was actually them revolting, but we've already covered that. So that's them the day before. And they were actually the Mamelukes were whatever the Moroccans were. I can't remember which division it was, but it was
the Moors.
The Moor. Oh yes, that's right. It was the Moors. So it's the mounted Moor division, Moorish division, who obviously the Spanish had big problems with because of the Moors and Spanish conflict from previous years. So this was obviously a provocation. So when the Moors on horseback were subduing the crowd reacted very badly and attacked the Moors.
That's interesting.
Curiously enough, the Spanish crowd, was actually calling for the death of a Spanish traitor. The Spanish traitor was actually a highly positioned Spanish official who was actually Goya's patron. So Goya was kind of in bed with the French collaborators and the Spanish upper class against the Spanish working class at the time. This is a few years later when he's trying to get into the good books of the following Spanish monarch.
Okay, back to the French again.
Yeah, French again. Liberty leading the people. So this is Delacroix from 1830. This was the restoration of the, I can't remember. But anyway, it's Liberty leading the people. So this is obviously it's a callback to the French Revolution, and she is wearing the Phrygian bonnet of the revolutionary, and she is leading the people across the barricades.
Is it a reference to the is it the July Revolution?
I think so.
Yeah, the 1830 July Revolution.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, because that was a Europe. There was it was a Europe-wide event, But yeah,
Well,
I mean,
there was the 1840. There was 1848 as well.
yeah, there was the 1848. Yeah, because it because I was just was that was the was that the Paris Commune, or was that the Paris Commune that later on?
No, Paris Commune was 1870. That was after the Franco-Prussian War.
Yeah. Okay.
But I guess just thinking about the painting a second, we've seen quite a lot of like direct realism. It's just trying to capture stuff in the moment, or say this is reality or a certain version of reality. But you've got the anthropomorphized figure of liberty here. So again, it's creating this blend between reality and the metaphorical. You've got things like literally the barrier is items, all like stuff, but it's also dead people as well. The bodies of we have to sacrifice people and then use them to help us get over the barricade kind of ideas. You've got figures like someone looking up to liberty directly, but also things like the little kid. Is he meant to be a newspaper boy or something like that? I remember
something like that, and she's obviously holding the French Republican flag. What we're seeing here is the 1830 toppling of the Bourbon monarchy. The Bourbon monarchy was, I think, they had a white flag with yellow with did they have the bees also as well?
It was the fleur-de-lis.
Fleur-de-lis.
I mean, another interesting historical point about this is that it shows that by 1830, opposition to the Bourbons and unrest in France was pretty much centered on all classes. Like it wasn't really this like sort of caricature of the workers rising up against the aristocrats anymore. Like you've got a man there with a musket in a top hat with a suit, dressed very smartly, next to a kind of slightly darker complexioned man with a sort of rumpled shirt torn open, and you got the kid there, and sort of all these dispossessed people among him. I mean, it's very very choice way to depict the 1830 rebellion, I think.
And of course you got like smoke. I think that's smoke in the background from the fighting. So for them, this was. I imagine for them this was not just a revolution, rebellion, but for them this was a proper war that they were fighting. Because it's like coming across as a I guess like an army near enough, but just a sort of unorganized, but still an army nonetheless.
No, definitely. Okay, I think we're now moving away from revolution now, aren't we?
Yeah, so here we have the Stonebreakers of 1849. This is a critical point where we have the Romantic movement giving way to the Realist movement. So this is Gustave Courbet, French painter. He took inspiration from the people the peasants who worked in his area, in his region. And this is a painting that was exhibited at the Salon, the Paris Salon. So obviously this was quite an interesting subject, because it depicted not only the poor, but the working poor, and also showing the working poor in their very humble clothes, doing backbreaking work and so forth. And his idea was to paint a sort of history paintings, but not of great men, not of generals, not of heroic soldiers, but of the working people. And this is obviously this realism leads into social realism. Now, social realism is different from socialist realism. Socialist realism is something that happens in the 20th century. Social realism is basically depicting the reality of people's lives, but also with a sort of reformist agenda. So it's pointing out things, but it's also suggesting that there should be change. Courbet, as we'll see, later gets involved with the Paris Commune, which was an explicitly left-wing communistic uprising in the center of Paris following the humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War.
In my mind, it's quite easy to see how we've ended up at this place of going from kings and emperors to literally peasants breaking stones apart, through that kind of like, looking at the vernacular and looking at those like little stories from people's lives. But we've sort of removed the, I guess there's a little bit of kind of tragedy and this kind of charity element. You can see the kind of young kid's got his ripped shirt or whatever. But I think he's approaching it from a position of respect and observation. He's not necessarily saying these are bad people or these are people in need. They're just good people doing work, in my mind. And I think it's almost like almost value free in some ways. Certainly this painting, although it sounds like he's a communist if he's going later. Also,
later on he will be. Yeah, he'll go full communist in 1870.
We've got a shout out to the tactical clogs here. Which is a great addition. Okay, and onto the Gleaners.
This is Jean-Francois Millet from a few years later. This is the Gleaners. And what happened was, obviously, the land and the crops belonged to the landowner, so they would harvest the grain, and the grain would go to the landowner, and the peasants would be paid for the work they did. Part of their pay was to take the spare seeds that were lying on the ground after the harvest. So here you see the gleaners who are picking individual seeds from the ground and putting them in their aprons. So this is literally the backbreaking work of people who are basically scavenging as part of their opportunities. Their pay was to be able to take the spare seeds on the ground. And obviously when this was exhibited in Paris in the Salon, people were thought it was kind of provocative to show working people in such a demeaning way, because of course they were used to seeing working people just as sort of like shepherds with flocks of woolly sheep, sort of sitting around under trees. So this was kind of a bit of a confrontation for them.
Just a little bit of context, Alexander. Just in terms of some of those revolutionary paintings, were like, how are they perceived in the kind of post-revolutionary environment? Were they kind of looked down upon, or
they were quite dangerous. So a lot of them were locked up. For example, the Goya paintings were kind of locked away for a long time because it was very risky. It was kind of risky, and it was politically inopportune to have them around. Also, you got to remember that some of these go into royal collections, so they're not always going to be seen in public galleries. So usually there is a gap between when a painting is made and exhibited and then when it enters the public collection. So a lot of these pictures, they go sort of off the radar for decades at a time, and sometimes they're only sort of acquired at the end of the 19th century when there's sort of like sufficient distance for them to be no longer outright topical.
Now it's just interesting, obviously, because again, if people are seeing those kind of revolutionary, liberty, fighting on the battlements, maybe they'll be more receptive. But I guess the kind of elite class is still quite aloof to the working person at the time. Yeah.
So here we have an example of naturalism. So basically, you've seen some realism, which was the Stonebreakers by Courbet and then Millet's Gleaners. So they're both examples of realism. This is an example of naturalism. So this is basically hypercharged realism. So it's super realistic. So this is a painting by Jules Bastien Lepage, who was the leader or founder of naturalism. And basically you look at this and this is super realistic. What you'll find is also at this time you have the pre-Raphaelites. who are doing obviously largely non-political work. And they're doing sort of hyper-realistic scenes of medieval history and so forth. This is a depiction of workers in who are sort of cutting hay. This is from 1877, and this kick-started the naturalism movement, which sort of swept through and carried on through the 1880s and the 1890s until sort of symbolism kind of took over.
Yeah, just on the pre-Raphaelite influence. So again, it's interesting. In the 19th century, there are, I guess, two big stars, and that's the French and the English. Sort of, again, this is my mind, fighting and competing with each other and influencing each other. And again, Millet and the other Millet.
Yes, two Millets.
He's and the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood come in the 1850s to create these, like you said, hyper-realistic paintings, but they really focus on the naturalism and the I guess the backgrounds of paintings. So again, if you see some of Millet's early paintings, like the Huntsman's Child, or some of Holman Hunt's, the amount of attention to detail to the backgrounds is ridiculous. And again, you can sort of feel that a little bit in this. I do wonder whether they've taken a bit from the Pre-Raphaelites, because this is 20 years later. As opposed to, again, something like, if you compare it to Courbet, the backgrounds are kind of like blended together. There's not much depth, and you can't see much detail. But again, there's almost like Pre-Raphaelite, like when you're painting individual bits of hay and stuff like that. That's showing things that are at the next level. I also just love her expression right now. It's just like, I'm done. I'm tired of making hay.
Yeah, and obviously you can see the clothing is super realistic, because he was basing this on models who were actually posing in his studio, which explains the lighting is slightly off. But yeah.
I'm going to bring up the other Millet. If it comes up. Nope. Okay, I was not prepared. I may find it in a second. But that takes us on to some hard times.
Yeah, so this is Hubert von Herkomer, who is a German-born British painter. So this is we're in the Victorian period. We're in 1855. So this is hard times, painting of day labourers who were just stopping on a country lane, ready to resume their trudge off to get the next bout of work. Herkomer is very, very famous for particularly his sort of Victorian scenes of sort of sentimental scenes of labourers and veterans, and he was hugely admired by many people, including Van Gogh.
There is a lot of this Victorian sentimentality, isn't there, that comes in like the 70s onward. Again, it's kind of like that kind of charity idea that Panama talked about beforehand, but like taken to the next level, where again, I feel like 1875 onwards is where like art becomes pretty left wing, in my opinion. Like it's a lot of these kind of bleeding heart liberals doing.
You feel like this is the channel 4 of the art world.
It's a very apt way to describe it. Yes.
But and I think I think the difference between this and the revolutionary paintings is that, like you said, they're kind of recognised as dangerous and was kind of locked away and hidden. But by the 1875 period, really, that kind of this is more like mainstreamed and kind of applauded, and you've kind of got like, I don't know, women's groups advocating for this kind of stuff, which is this is the beginning of the end.
And also and the suffragette movement and so forth. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
So famous example of we're talking here obviously about the overlap between politics and art. This was again, this was seen as a revolutionary picture because it was when it was exhibited in 1865. This is Manet's painting of Olympia, 1863. And this was seen as an affront to the viewers because it was seen as a parody of a famous painting by Giorgione of Venus. And this was obviously not Venus. This was basically what they thought of as a common prostitute or a mistress. And here she's receiving a bouquet of flowers from an admirer, and she's sort of staring out at us in a sort of rather brazen way. And this was seen as being sort of cheap and provocative because it was displaying women in a way that was not respectful.
There's an interesting point around the line between sensualness and like eroticism and beyond. And again, it's there is a fine line, I think, between the artistic nude and trying to purposely shock. And again, I think it's hard for us to understand now how shocking this would have been. But like from what I've read about it before previously, that like Olympia is like the common name of like a prostitute at that time. Like imagine being something called like Crystal or something like that. You imagine them to be a stripper. But Panama, I don't know if you had any talking points around sensuality you want to bring in here.
I mean, I basically agree with the critics of the time. That it's more into just sort of shock than it is into sensuality. I mean, I think I would contrast this with the nude Macha of Goya as an example of how. I mean, for a start, as you said, she's a common prostitute. She does not really embody anything that you could call aspirational or that tends upward in a sort of that gives us something. I want to say it doesn't give me anything meaningful. I mean, she doesn't even have a particularly sort of womanly figure in the sort of sensual sense. Like there isn't much of a.
Do you want to rate her? Do you want to give us a number? She's not a 10 for you.
Well, no, I don't mean just that. I mean, she's not evocative of feminine beauty in the artistic tradition that I would advocate for, in that sense. That she's just a naked woman. She's not anything more than a naked woman, to sum it up.
There's something materialistic about it. I think you've really hit the nail on the head, where again, it's kind of like ideas of the nude Venus, etc. It's going for that the ideas of the big B beauty, transcendental ideas, idealism, platonic forms, etc. While it's just the woman that's there, just again, it's almost like the realism as opposed to ideas and thoughts on beauty, which again, I think people like listening in from the outside may think that's a bit where is the line, but I think there is a key differentiation between just the body and what the body stands for, and like you said, subtleties in the type of person that's being portrayed, and even just the subject matter. I feel like that's one of the. I did a tweet about this recently. One of the hallmarks of modernism, postmodernism, is that any subject is okay, or like you can create amazing art with any subject. And I think the problem is that in a more traditional view, there are subjects that are more base, and just calling this person a prostitute makes the entire painting more more base, even if the kind of the structure and the layout is similar to those Venuses of the Renaissance. Also, again, little detail shout out to Tiny Cat here on the right hand side, because again, I think that's a really people often talk about how it's almost like you're in the room with Olympia, and I think the cat's quite good of showing that because he's got his arched back. You can imagine him hissing at the unfamiliar person in the room. So again, that's quite a clever way of showing you that you're in there, which again I think is more. Again, it's almost too real. This isn't about beauty. This isn't about beauty. It's about going to see a whore. So,
also, side note in French, the word pussy means the same thing as it does in English.
Okay.
Well, there you go. I mean, the French have a whole thing around le chat noir as well. The whole black cat is a sort of motif through French culture. And another point about this painting is it's ironic that what was once a kind of socially transgressive, culturally transgressive piece would, I think now, because of the implications with what appears to be a black servant woman, would basically now be locked up by the left as a sort of, I guess, well, whatever word of the day they would use to describe it. But I mean, that's I don't imagine they would play this very much.
No. Well, yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that the both the I guess the critics of the day of this and the left today would reach the same conclusion. They'd reach the same conclusion, but they would go different avenues to get to the conclusion. So, I mean, yeah, like today it'd be like, oh, how can this poor black servant be subjugated and having to serve this woman who's been so indecent? And then the indecency of back then was the fact that because she looks pretty I mean, the thing is, she looks pretty comfortable in all of this. It doesn't look and it's quite. It seems like quite normal, like on her face, on the servant's face. It's like a normal thing what she's doing here, just sort of sitting here in the nude.
Mm-hmm.
I think the role of the servant in the painting is actually quite interesting because it's just to look at the face on there. There's kind of disgust in it. I'm going to say, or I don't know, almost kind of confusion. And again, I think the role of the servant in the painting is almost like judgmental. So I think it's actually quite a I know, like a positive role for that person to be in there. But we're running out of time, so I'm gonna steam on ahead to yes, is it the floor?
The floor scrapers, yeah. So this is by Gustav Caillebotte, who was an impressionist painter. So this is obviously another scene of working. This was obviously working men. We're going to come to working women in a minute. I think the thing that stands out for me, obviously, this isn't a particularly impressionist painting. So in terms of style, it's not. You wouldn't, if you were asked to describe it, you'd probably call it a realist painting. It doesn't seem particularly impressionist. You don't have like the blended brushwork or the impasto or the different colours in combination. But I think maybe the most interesting thing to look at is the wine bottle on the right. Now, at this time, Paris did not have good. It didn't have drinking water, potable drinking water from the mains. So obviously, in order to drink, you had to drink something that was safe. You couldn't drink water because largely water was sort of a carrier of all sorts of disease, including cholera. So people would drink wine or beer, which because of the alcohol as an antiseptic quality, which means that it's generally safe to drink, or safer to drink than water was at the time. So the presence of the wine bottle has kind of confused people because they kind of wonder, what's that wine doing there? Well, that wine was the drink of the working class while they were at work. So this is, and obviously this is related a little bit towards social reform, because this is the time, 1870s, when Baron Haussmann was reforming or demolishing large parts of central Paris in order to carry out his civic improvements. And part of those improvements was the introduction of running mains water. So this is kind of like it's like a sort of a side note. This is something that you wouldn't necessarily notice otherwise.
No, I've seen this before, but I didn't realise about the wine. That's really interesting. Okay.
Fair. I've just got to go. I've got to go, I'm afraid.
Yep.
So thank you for having me on. And
yeah, it was good to have you.
Thank you, and I'll see you guys. See you guys later. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye. Yeah. So this is a painting of laundresses by Degas. Degas, obviously the famous Impressionist painter. Again, just a scene of working life. Interestingly, Degas, although he painted working people a lot, here you can see one with a wine bottle again. This is very hot work being a laundress, working in a laundry. He worked a lot with working class people, especially working class women, for his portraits of workers and also for the nudes. The nudes were mainly working class women who modelled. But Degas was considered a reactionary. I'm sure you'd be pleased to hear. So he was not in favour of social reform. He was not in favour of the left. He was an anti-Dreyfusard. So he was he expressed some anti-Semitic thoughts, and he was opposed to progressive politics, and he was an outright nationalist. So here you have an interesting scene of a reactionary conservative actually painting a sympathetic portrait of working class people, although not in a social agenda manner.
In my mind, it's not that surprising that reactionaries would paint the working class like this. So, for example, certainly in if you think about Carlyle and Ruskin, there is like a veneration for the working class and a real care for them, but for them to be in there as Carlyle would say, like in their proper place, basically. So like it's interesting that we haven't seen more of that, like art of the noble working class doing what they do from that perspective. But like I said, I think this is kind of like where the kind of leftism really takes hold, sadly. So
I'm sort of picking out the most prominent examples of the cross section between art and politics. Now, obviously, there are reactionary elements, but unfortunately, they tend to be in less well-known art. And I mean, maybe it's worth doing a stream on reactionary art at some stage.
Yeah, Panama, you were going to say something?
Well, I mean, just on the point about the kind of reactionary view of the working class, I think the kind of longer ranging reactionary tradition, of course, the term reactionary is something of a catch-all. It's difficult to say exactly what a person with that label would think. But I mean, it's, from what I understand, the further back you go into this sort of era, a reactionary is not kind of aghast at views of working people, but more to the fact that they're kind of being mistreated almost by the fact that they're being employed by capitalistic liberal structures rather than traditional sort of artistic or sort of countryside based ones seems to be the thing here. So I mean, like this, if you want to take a reactionary lens to view this painting, it makes sense, because you're sort of looking at these two people who are condemned, women who probably shouldn't be doing this sort of work, sort of like hot heavy day by day labor, in some laundry sort of I don't know what you call it, laundry shop, laundry workshop somewhere in Paris, having to drink down wine and you know to carry on with their labor. It's sort of, yeah, I can understand that whole angle basically.
Definitely. No, and I like the idea of the reactionary art stream. That's quite interesting. But
yeah, that sounds fun. So here we have a painting from 1901 by Camille Pissarro. Pissarro, the Impressionist. He went through a phase of divisionism or pointillism. Pissarro was an anarchist. So, but he was a sort of a left anarchist rather than a right anarchist. Interesting overlap between anarchism and pointillism. Basically, there was an idea that, Pissarro for a time was a pointillist, so this is working in little dots of color, the style pioneered by Seurat. If you just search for Alexander Adams Signac, Signac, you will find my article discussing the overlap between anarchism and pointillism. And it's basically that the idea that there was an even distribution of colors in little dots, and this somehow equated to the even amount of power distributed amongst the people. So it's kind of a bit of a crankish thing, but I thought it's worth mentioning.
It's interesting. I never knew that at all. I'm a huge fan of Pissarro's son, actually, who was involved in the Ergony press. He started his own private press, and I think his father basically
was that Lucien.
Sorry. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he married an English woman, and I'm pretty sure his father just thought he was crap, because I've seen some of the correspondence, and he's always kind of like, "Oh, you just keep doing your thing, son." And I just feel like he felt really let down that his son had started a business, which is probably going against his anarchist tendencies, and B, that he was doing this more traditional style of illustration work. But anyway, that's an aside. But again, interesting. More of these kind of working scenes.
But this, of course, is more. This is the rural poor, and here we have the rural poor again in Van Gogh's Potato Eaters of 1885. Van Gogh went through a very period of producing very dark, heavy pictures of workers. This was when he was he worked as a missionary, and he was very involved with the mining community in Brabant, and also the peat diggers and the weavers and so forth. And this was a painting where he wanted to create figures who were so connected to the earth that they actually looked like they came from the earth, which explains why they're so sort of dark coloration to the skin. And also, that they were basically equivalent to the potatoes they were eating in a crude way.
I was going to say that they're almost kind of like goblin-esque creatures huddled up in their little.
It's close to caricature. There's this again. It's very interesting. If you want to look up my discussion of this is for the viewers. You look up Alexander Adams Gauguin colonialism. You'll see my article discussing how people talk about colonialism in the sense of people going to foreign climates, like for example Gauguin going to Martinique and going to Tahiti to paint the locals there, and this was kind of a form of imperialism and sort of Orientalism. And I say that's absolute nonsense, because you can find people like Van Gogh going to regions of his own country and painting his own countrymen and treating them as if they are exotic foreigners. So the idea of Orientalism being related to race and being necessarily related to foreign countries is completely false. It is something that applies within countries, and it is not racially based.
That's really interesting. I hadn't even thought about thinking of it that way. And I guess Van Gogh was constantly in these kind of foreign lands, wasn't he? So he was, and again, chasing impressionism. It's almost adopting like a foreign language himself as part of his work. we're running close on time. Do we want to do these last couple?
Yeah. So this is basically where we tie everything up. This is the cross section between the 19th century and the 20th century. 3 female miners here by Constantine Meunier, an artist you've never heard of, but who you will be able to impress your friends and family with, because I'm going to tell you something very amazing in a minute. So 3 female miners. Belgian painter, worked a lot in the mining communities, depicting workers there. Belgium was very heavily industrialized, big producer of steel, of coal, also of textiles. So there was a lot of that work. He also painted stevedores and dock workers and so forth. So here we have a painting of female mine workers. If you want to move on to the next one. So here is a puddler. So this is a steel worker whose job it was to pour molten steel into molds, and he's wearing clogs underneath sort of leather flaps. He's got an apron on. The apron is probably also leather. He's got something to protect his head, which is little more than, again, I think it's just a piece of leather. And he's holding some sort of I think it's probably a skimming device or a tool that he would use to move the crucible over the mold. So this is from about the 1890s or something. This is very, very important because Constantine Meunier is perhaps the most influential sculptor in history, perhaps bar the ancient Greeks. Yes, even greater than Michelangelo, because if you look in terms of influence, if you go to the next one, I will show you why. So this is socialist realism. So the last one was social realism. This is socialist realism. This is a work from the German Democratic Republic from about 1950. So this is the art of communism. Constantine Meunier, who died in sort of the 1910s or whatever, he was producing social realist art of workers, industrial workers, dockers, miners. His ideal became the ideal of the socialist realists, who were communists, and also to a degree the fascists, the Nazis also. So Meunier becomes the template for almost all the heroic workers who you see in bronze statues, in murals of, prosperous workers in the Soviet Union and so forth. So Meunier is actually the cornerstone of socialist realist art, which became one of the most dominant forms of art in the 20th century. And I think you've got another example following, which is, so here we have another statue from the German Democratic Republic from sort of the post-war years. And this is not entirely dissimilar to the Meunier sculpture that we saw. So here we have demonstrated perhaps that Constantine Meunier and his works and his sculptures of workers were perhaps the most influential sculptures of all time.
That's fascinating. And again, you can definitely see, again, if you go to any kind of ex-Soviet country, they're just ram-packed with sculptures like this of steel workers. Again, the idealized form, it's almost kind of like the inevitable conclusion of realism is the kind of fetishization of the working class and working ideals into these kind of heroic figures almost. But I think we've got to wrap up there for tonight, I'm afraid. So we will have maybe one more session on art and politics, and that's going to be looking at 20th century.
Socialist realism, maybe a little bit of fascist art or Nazi art, if you feel brave.
Hey, let's see if I can get my channel banned.
No, we don't need to do that. But I mean, there's plenty of political art that doesn't fall into those areas.
Cool. So, any last words from anyone at all? Panama, are you doing up to anything?
I'm not. I may there maybe a video out in the next 2 weeks or so. But one other thing with this stream is I think would it be possible just to go over one more painting quickly? Because I feel like it's very integral and we missed it.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I do apologise. I did actually forget your. I will try and bring it up now. Hold on a second.
Just because it's interesting. Basically, because it was painted not very far from all the paintings that we just saw, the kind of realist works. This painting here, it's slightly obscure. There aren't many large versions of it. I'm not sure, but basically,
Just trying to find.
this is an equestrian painting of Queen Isabella II of Spain. And all the grandees of sort of Spanish nobility. And just to kind of, we talked earlier about fanciful paintings of rulers in kind of Roman garb, looking, sort of absurdly romanticized. I suggest you actually look up a picture of an actual, a real life picture of Isabella II of Spain, just to point how absurd this is. I don't think Isabella II was capable of any equestrianism. But yeah, I mean, she.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's just interesting that even this kind of late stage, you still had these very fanciful paintings of monarchs and grandees, and of course the absurd thing is that this painting would have been an enormous effort because of the amount of real nobility featured in this. You have to call together all these people to sit for this artwork. I mean, yeah, it's a completely fanciful depiction. I thought maybe we'd do it now because it wouldn't really fit in with the next piece of this series that we do. But...
No. I guess with all of the republicanism and revolutions on the continent, kings and queens are in short supply, but it does show that continue for showing a certain image of yourself. And again, it's I guess she physically couldn't ride a horse. She's just so large. So I quite like the painting though. I think it's I like all the kind of noblemen. I guess they would be.
It's a bit like those memes of the God Emperor. you know those memes where you have you can put the face onto the general.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I actually have this painting. Not obviously not the original. A print of this painting hanging in my house because it's one of my favorites, just because of how absurd but somehow still quite epic it manages to be. I mean, she was monarch at a time of a lot of civil war in Spain, as many Spanish monarchs are. But as far as I'm aware, she did not ever lead marshals into battle like this. I don't think yes.
Fake news.
Well, I mean, this is an image to end the stream on right there, I think. So without further, I just want to thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Panama. Thank you, Al, for being on. And I will
remember to subscribe.
Oh yes, again, this is where I literally work in marketing, and Alex is about 10 times better at doing this than I am. Please subscribe. Join us on Twitter. Continue the conversation there. If you think we've missed out any interesting paintings about politics and power, please tweet them at me, and we can rate them. But I think we'll hopefully do another stream in the new year after all of the Christmas shenanigans. But until then, good night.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.